This session is called Creating Graphic Novels, and we're very fortunate to have a distinguished panel of guests along with us. Rather than me explaining what they do, I would love for them just to tell you what their place is in this world of graphic novels. So we have Daniel Corey here. Daniel is a Full Sail graduate with the digital media, and you go ahead.
Yeah, hi, I'm Daniel Corey, digital media grad from 1998, back in the last century. Yeah, but I create graphic novels. My first book was a self-published book with my company Danger Cat called Profit, and I've since been with Image Comics doing the Moriarty series about Sherlock Holmes' arch nemesis, and have a new series coming out in the summer. So,
welcome.
I'm Troy DeVolld, and a lot of you might know me for reality television, which is what I've been doing for many years, but my career actually started in 1990. I was a comic book illustrator and artist. I had a book called Ike and Kitsy Comics. I was lucky enough to have been, as a teenage cartoonist, Will Eisner used to give me letters and write advice and give me little drawing assignments to mail back to him. I have a continued interest in graphic novels. The last book that I put out myself was Jinx Upel, Psychic Performance Artist, in 1996, just before I came here. I was a cartoonist for What Wave magazine. I did a lot of fanzine stuff in the 80s, so that's where I'm coming from.
All right, I'm Roland Mann. I got my start in the small press in the late 1980s. Worked as a writer for several years before being hired by Malibu Comics. I then became a Marvel editor by default because Marvel bought the company. And so I worked there for a couple of years, and that's how most people know me. They know me as the Marvel editor. But I did that until about 2000, right after the industry crashed, and got out and started teaching. So now I'm very fortunate to be an instructor here where I get to teach writing for comics and animation.
Okay, my name is Cezar. I have a last name which is Romanian, and you won't be able to pronounce it, so I'm going to skip that part. I am an instructor here at Full Sail. I'm also an MFA student under Noelani, and so she said, you show up today, so I showed up today. I didn't have a choice of that either, but I write screenplays in my second life, and my last screenplay was I was forced to turn it into a graphic novel, so that's why I'm here, because I was forced to create a graphic novel, and then I was forced to attend by my boss, so that's the story.
So Cesar's very happy to be here.
Yes.
So let me start off with a nice general question, and I'm curious, what were the comic influences on each of you? I mean, what sparked your interest in this industry? If you want to just start off here and go down, that's fine.
For me, my first graphic novel was Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, and I remember reading about it in the local newspaper here when it came out. What a groundbreaking deal that was! That it was something that was taking Batman and superheroes seriously and kind of contextualizing superheroes in in what was today. In reality, talking about nuclear winter and real violence and what real superheroes would be like if they were, Anyway, so reading that book was, it was kind of introduced me to this idea that comics can matter, that it's, kind of rides the currents of current culture, and yeah, that was just really eye opener for me. So that was kind of my entree into comics. So.
Cool.
Troy?
I can tell you that, as a teen in the 80s, I grew up in the middle of what the sort of the black and white independent comic glut of the 1980s where anybody could put out a book. I was really interested in a lot of stuff that came from a place called Aardvark Vanaheim Press. They did Cerebus, they did Normal Man. Jim Valentino is still working in comics. The one big influence on me had always been a guy named Will Eisner, who really was a pioneer with the graphic novels. I was a big fan of the Spirit comics and then started seeking out his other work and I came across A Contract with God, which is really kind of the book that changed my approach to at least how I was working. So, I'm rooted in a very old school graphic novel place. But I think what's interesting is that Will Eisner, the stories that are very personal, You're seeing a lot of those now. Brian Feast had a great book out called Mom's Cancer a couple years ago that won an award. So that's the stuff that influences me, at least as far as how I write and where my sensibilities come from.
Roland?
Well, for me, I go back just a little bit further than that. I go back to the 70s. Comics are actually what sort of taught me to read. So my early influences were very much the Silver Age, Marvel Comics, Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko. I'm a big fan of Steve Englehart. And this was in the day before, of course, it was cool to like comics. When I would take them to school and I would have to hide them or else under threat of getting beat up. And so it's cool for me to see that there's a big change in that now, and that comics are kind of cool and geeks are kind of the cool kids, because back in the day it very much was not. I'm influenced by a lot of things today. Now that's kind of what got me started, but I'm influenced by a lot of things today, and a lot of it is the alternative, the things that are published that are alternative to Marvel and DC today. A lot of the independent press. I don't read a lot of Marvel and DC books anymore, but I read a lot of independent comics.
For me, the ultimate graphic novel is the graphic adaptation of The Dark Tower by Stephen King. I swear on that book, on that series of books, actually. I like some other graphic artists. I'm a huge fan of Fiona Staples. I'm looking to see how she's going to develop. I think she has a tremendous potential as an artist. But if I have to go on an island and have only one graphic novel with me, that will be The Dark Tower by Stephen King, definitely.
I have a lot of questions here. I'll just choose you randomly, but please feel free, if you have any additional comments, please feel free to jump in. So, Roland, let me ask you, so how do graphic novels and comics offer, what do they offer as a storytelling medium that's different than, say, film or TV or any other mediums?
That's an easy one for me, I think, because when you go to watch a television show or when you go to watch a film, the people who create these things dictate to you what you see and how quickly you see it. In a comic book or in a graphic novel, the reader determines. If you want to sit there and stare at a beautiful piece of art for 10 minutes, you can sit there and just, you can read the text and you can sit there and just absorb all the details of the image on the page. You can't do that with any other medium. And so for me, that's one of the beauties, is that it's kind of it's not a choose-your-own-adventure kind of thing, but it's kind of, you determine the speed at which you enjoy the format that you're given in. Like, I love the Avengers movie, and you can go and watch that, but once the scene passes, if you want to see it again, you have to hit the rewind button, and that destroys sort of the flow of the story. But in a comic, it doesn't destroy your own personal flow. You may see the same image that I do and kind of move past it very, very quickly. But I may sit there and look for all the tiny details in the background or the facial expressions of the characters. For me, that's one of the primary things that graphic novels can offer the audience that other types of entertainment cannot.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Again, for me, this is a totally new experience, and I had to learn the trade in the last 6 months. But I wrote a screenplay, and I pitched it as a film. And every single producer that listened to my pitch said, it has graphic novel written all over. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I wrote it as a film. No, do it as a graphic novel. So I had to go and rethink my own baby and realize that it had certain qualities that lean themselves toward a still picture treatment as opposed to a moving picture treatment. And initially I took it the wrong way. You guys know what you're talking about. I know what I'm talking about. This is a film. And then I realized they are right. This can actually be a cool graphic novel. So I think every medium has its own strengths and weaknesses, and you have to play your idea on the strengths of the medium, because there are things you can do with words that you can't do on camera, but there are things you can do on camera you can do on words, and there are things you can do on still pictures that you can't do on moving pictures. And sometimes it's tricky to nail your medium. And you may start in a corner and end up in the other corner, and you have to be flexible enough to allow people with a lot more experience than you to give you some hints that, hey, you know what? Yes, you want to have a movie out of this, but guess what? It's a graphic novel, actually. So go with the flow, how they say it.
Yeah, it's you're tapping a different area of the reader's brains. Like when you consider different media, you think of like stage, writing for the stage or something. everything is in real time in the theater, and it's more a matter of following the moments between two actors or however many actors are involved in a scene that engages you a particular way. Movies are, you know, when you like write for a movie, it's about writing for the cutting almost, you know, the pacing of the dialogue with the music, with the sound effects, with the camera motion. But with the comics, you know, it's something altogether because, you know, you have like 4 or 5 panels per page, and you get to choose which moments you're going to isolate, you know. So if you want to show complexity in a particular character, you want to isolate their particular reaction to something that was just said to them off panel, you can do that. And I think, you know, it engages, there's a theater of the mind aspect, and like when you read a novel, it's completely theater of the mind, you know, but when you're reading a comic, you still get a little bit of that because the reader gets to kind of read into the character's expressions, gets to kind of read behind the lines, but also is having something fed to them, but they're also kind of giving back to it what they're taking from it. So it engages you in a particular way. That's kind of unique.
I also find that I think it's much easier in comics to tell complex stories and get people really involved in the backstory. The benefit of having spent a little bit of time in television and very little time in film is that there's always this sort of ease of digestion problem that we have in movies and TV where we wonder if people are going to remember something that happened 30 minutes ago. In comics, like you say, you have that ability to, you read something and there's a realization or something that moves you forward. You can always refer back to, at your own pace, things that happened earlier in the book. So even when I was very young, the stuff that I was reading in graphic novels, the stories just are more complex and richer, I think, in comics than probably almost anywhere else, in almost any other medium completely.
And one other thing that we just always kind of brag about in comics, and of course, you know, the film has come a long way in the kind of special effects that they can present on screen now, but you know, even today, it still costs a lot of money. One of the things we used to always brag about is that, well, in comics, we have an unlimited special effects budget because our budget is not going to change. You know, you can write whatever you want to write, space opera, or you can write a romance or a Western. It doesn't matter. The budget doesn't change on your content. It's only on what you're going to pay the artist. Right. And his imagination or her imagination is the budget limit. So we used to always kind of brag about that.
Sometimes the artist complains, why are you putting so many crowd scenes in there? You know, kind of draw all these different faces.
Because we don't have to pay extras.
Right.
That's why all my books were geometric backgrounds, because I was just lazy.
Well, Dan, you bring up a good point, though. I'm curious about what is the relationship of the writer to your artist? And can you address that?
Love, hate, no.
Hate.
Not true at all. No. Well, you know, it's kind of like producer to director or director to cinematographer almost, you know. When I come up, you know, when I write the script for a story, I come up with an idea, write the script, you know, find an artist to work with. It's like a whole new phase of story development occurs at that point because as they're going through the script beat for beat, you know, they'll see things a little differently. Maybe, you know, sometimes they'll ask, is it right if I combine these 2 panels? What if we don't do a 2-page spread here and I just divide it up? You know, there's a collaboration that happens. And at some points, it's like working with a director, working with an actor because, you know, I've written in live theater. That's where I started. And, you know, the nice thing is you write a script, you write a play, write a scene, whatever, and you can imagine an actor playing this line a particular way, and then you give it to a really good actor, and they do something completely different that you didn't expect, and it's better than what you imagined. And that's what working with a great artist in comics is like, because, you know, if you can get an artist that can give you a sense of duality in a person, you know, in a facial expression, for example, if they're really upset about something, but they're pretending to be happy on the outside, and you can see that on the page, you know, that's when you know the collaboration's working out, when you can pull those kind of moments, and you know, when the artist is being able to pull those kind of moments from your script, it's a really special thing. So, but yeah, I mean, comics, like film, is you know, collaborative in that way. So.
What about the rest of you? Do you have any comments?
I always tell the students in the class that and it's really tough to shift gears because, you know, in film and television, they're always told, don't direct, don't direct, don't direct. And so by the time they get to my class, I'm having to tell them you have to shift gears a little bit. Mm-hmm. And what I always try to say is think of yourself as the co-director. And so I say, if you see the shot, call it. But if you don't see the shot, remember that you're a co. And a co means that there's somebody else in collaboration with you. And so you have to leave room for the artist to have their collaborative creative input as far as visually telling the story. But if you see the shot, call it. But remember that it is a co for collaboration, and, you know, co for there's more than one. Mm-hmm. So I think that's always something to keep in mind as a writer, is that you are working with somebody else.
Cezar or Troy, do you have any comments on that?
I was the writer and illustrator of all my own independent books, so I never had the experience of working with an editor or with anyone else.
And I think that's probably the best case scenario ever, where you see it, you draw it, you write it, you letter it. I mean, that's probably the best case scenario. Otherwise, you have to remember that somebody puts the money down. And in the biz industry, whoever puts the money down calls the shots. So there is creative control, but at the end of the day, if I want that horse to be on all four legs, that horse is going to be on all four legs. Whether you can convince me or not, that the horse should be on two legs. And I'm just giving this example because we fought for 3 years with my graphic artist, for 3 days, sorry, over a horse in my graphic novel, okay? It so happened was the opening panel, and I wanted that horse the right way, as in on all four legs. But bottom line is, I would give my graphic artist all the artistic freedom in the world because he's the guy who draws it. I mean, I wrote that screenplay a year ago. I haven't done anything since. He just draws day in and day out. So I would love to give him all the creative control in the world. The problem is that at times he goes against the story because he's using too much imagination. He's trying to overdo things at times. So we have a contract. The contract says that at the end of the day, after we flip back and forth inks and sketches forever, somebody has to call the shots. And since I raised the money, I call the shots. So keep it simple like this. Don't try a voting system. Don't try, let's bring grandma in and see whether grandma can you know, break a truce between the two of us. That's not going to happen. Somebody has to say the horse is on all four legs, period. Move on, next panel, you know. Otherwise, it takes forever.
Well, what about the role of the editor? Can we address this? I know, Roland, you've done this. Yeah. So what is the role of an editor in comics and graphic novels?
Well, it's an ever-changing role, and the role of the editor varies depending on what company that you work with. If you are, for instance, if you're a Marvel editor, you are the gatekeeper to the character. It falls upon the editor to be true to what the company standards for the character are. And so if something happens that goes against corporate standards for, say, Spider-Man, it's not the writer or the artist that's going to get blamed, it's the editor that's going to get blamed. So but now that's corporate comics, and they have very much these, their corporate, you know, properties that they have to protect. When you go someplace different, like maybe Daniel can address this, at Image, in small press books, the editor is kind of there to facilitate the writer's concept and story. They're there to actually, as a friend. In Marvel, there's very much, and I say this, I've never worked as an editor at DC, but I think that's the same thing there. There's very much an antagonistic view of the editors at Marvel, and that kind of they're the enemy. And I think a lot of that does come from the fact that they are the gatekeeper, and writers often want to push the boundaries, but rightfully so, that's what writers are supposed to do. They often want to push the boundaries and do things that the Marvel editors come back and say, well, you can't do that, I'm sorry. This is Spider-Man, you cannot do that. And so there's often sort of this antagonistic mentality, and the editors often sort of get chalked up as they're the enemy. They're not supposed to be that way. That's not the way that the roles are sort of set out. So I think it tends to work a little better when you fall outside of corporate comics, in that the editors are there to kind of help you facilitate the idea and the concept and your vision for the property that you have. And like I said, maybe Daniel can more address that for kind of how Image does that.
Yeah, it's well, it's interesting at Image. They we don't have like editors per se, but we do work with the publisher, like the main publisher there. What they do, there's kind of an induction period to get into Image is what I discovered was they expressed interest in the property, and then it was about a period of a year of just kind of talking to them about certain aspects of the book, things that they wanted changed in the artwork. Let's call it a hazing period. It took about a year before we finally signed the contract. So it was and what I discovered during that time, it was a trust building situation. Mm-hmm. And you know, they read all my scripts ahead of time and liked what we were doing. So at that point, there was a trust built. So they kind of just let us go and do what we wanted at that point. But
did they ask for changes at all, like in any of your scripts? They say maybe changes or that?
No, they read my first storyline, and then after that, they didn't even touch the second storyline that we did. They just let us do whatever we wanted. I was glad because we went some pretty bizarre ways, and I was very, very pleased with it. And yeah, it came out word for word what we wanted. You know, and there's a matter of finding the right artist, though. So they definitely. You know, like with me, I come in with the concept and scripts and all this. They want me to find the right artist. So that's a matter of, there's a lot of direction as far as that goes, you know. So, but like you just day to day, like story stuff. Yeah, since I got inducted to that period of hazing, things worked out. So yeah, there's a lot of trust that happens in independent comics. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the draws for small press and independent comics is that there is a lot of freedom there that you don't get at Marvel and DC. The advantage of Marvel and DC obviously is the paycheck.
Yes.
They can pay what no one else can pay, but there's also the very, very strict guidelines because, I mean, when I was an editor there, I called for lots of changes. And it wasn't unusual that a writer would submit something to me, and I would say, oh, you can't do that. You don't do that. Now, you know, they would argue with me a little bit, but ultimately they would go back, and they're the ones who would come up with the idea, or they might even say, well, what about if I do this or this or that? But ultimately, you know, I was the gatekeeper there for the things, and it was not unusual that I would have to ask for changes.
So I'm curious about, though, as far as a writer, so we usually think in terms of story as being linear. Well, traditional story is linear. But when it comes to the format of comics, it's taking the story and it's breaking it into different components to fit the traditional comic format. So what is that like as a writer? Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I'll start off. Okay. I think of it as like television for me. Each of my issues is like an episode. I plan out a season and cut it into, you know, a certain amount of episodes, and that's what we do. You know, when I'm at conventions signing my book, we have 2 volumes of Moriarty, and you know, people will see. I've got like 2 paperback volumes, and then I have everything compiled into a hardcover edition. And they like, where do I start? What is it like? Okay, this is like season 1, this is season 2, and then this is seasons 1 and 2 together, and then they get that. So there's an overall arc. So it's like when you think in the kind of 3-act storytelling paradigm, I tell the 3 acts are divided up over, you know, over the entire season. So like our volume 1 was 4 issues, so it was kind of like our first issue was like Act 1 of the story, and then, you know, Act 2 was issues 2 and 3, and then we got to the climactic portion, of course, by number 4. So kind of plan it out that way, episodic.
But breaking it down on the page, do you think in those terms? Are you thinking, okay, I'm going to write X number of pages, and you see, okay, this is going to be in this panel, this is going to be in this panel? Do you do that, or is it that you give the artist that?
Yeah, and it was like Roland was saying. There's you can direct on the page. So yeah, I always want the certain issues. I always want the issues to conform to a certain page count, 22 to 24 pages, because I discovered that if you go over 28 pages, then suddenly printing costs go up about $1,000. Found that out the hard way. Yeah, I make sure the issues conform to that page count, but it's like going page to page. Each individual page is like rule of thumb is like, I try not to go more than 5 panels, because I don't want to crowd things too much. I want there to be a good flow for the artist to work with and their layout. But yeah, panel to panel, it's like I said before, you know, it's a matter of picking the moments, picking and choosing the moments. However it is you want to realize the scene, whatever it is you want to evoke in this particular scene is reflected on the moments you choose, panel to panel. And I'll direct the artist in you know, moment to moment in the script. So actually, like, it's like page 1, panel 1, interior, bar, night, you know. High shot looking down at hero sitting at bar drinking, describe the guy, what he looks like, you know. So it's like a movie script sort of, but it's like I said, you're carving it up into specific moments. But then the artist gets that, and he might find that you know, the camera motion's a little better maybe if we start off with just a regular straight on shot of the hero rather than a high up shot, because when the guy comes in over here, you know, it's better established if we're at this particular angle than the one I saw in my head. And I'm like, okay, go ahead and do it that way. So yeah, there's the collaboration. But yeah, like I said, just you divide it up by moments on the page and divide each issue up as being part of the overall arc. So.
You guys have any other comments?
Just to follow up on the 3-act structure, to whatever extent you guys are familiar with it, you know, the 3 acts, the setup, complication, resolution thing. And if you want to split the act in the middle, the second act in 2, because it should be split into the midpoint, also splits the second act in 2, then you basically end up with 4 acts. Now, halfway through each of these 4 parts, you do end up with a twist point. It's called a clip or whatever other, you know, word you want to do. If you can make them work as your cliffhangers, then here's your 8-issue paradigm, basically. If you end up cutting every issue on one of those cliffhangers, you know, halfway through the setup, up to the inciting incident, then threshold into 1, then halfway through second part of the 2, and so on and so forth, we try to build ours 8-issue series where we will end every issue on one of those cliffhangers. And to whatever extent we are successful or not, it has to be seen. But I think trying to bend the 3-act structure into your design of your series, it's a smart thing. I mean, you know, you can learn a lot from TV and film on how to do that. But
definitely, like on TV shows, yeah. Lost or whatever, they always end on a cliffhanger. So you always want your issue to end.
Yes, you want on page 24 to say where the heck is the next issue coming. That's the whole point. So,
and that, like I always say, whenever I talk about television, even with reality, I always say story is story and story is written. Anything that works in one particular medium should translate to the other, because we're so used to a certain form of storytelling that no matter how we're actually receiving that information, whether it's in a comic book, a reality show, a scripted series, or a sitcom, we still expect things to be set up, paid off, and our cliffhangers to be in the same places.
Well, that brings me to my next question. So as a content provider, and you know, we are living in a transmedia world, what considerations do you make as a writer when you're creating a story that very well may go into a game or a TV show or to an action figure? What type of writerly considerations do you make?
The reason why my books have never gone anywhere is because most of them have female protagonists, which seems to be a problem when you're writing in the fantasy space or anything that's going to cost you real money to make.
Really?
It's disappointing and it's depressing, but that is sort of the state of the industry. I think in comics you can get away with it more than you can anywhere else.
Roland, you have any?
You know, I don't know that I've ever taken any other into consideration. I tend to think, of course, I've been called a purist, and I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I tend to view comics and graphic novels as a very unique medium. If they can be translated somewhere else, then great. But when I'm creating a comic, I'm not thinking of what this is going to look like as an action figure or what this is going to look like as a game. Now, maybe down the road a little bit, after I've got a few under my belt, I might say, you know what, this could make a really cool film, or this could make a really good TV series. But I think that for me, personally anyway, the creation process is not what this could be as a film, but what will this look like on the comic book page. So maybe I do things backwards, but I don't know.
No, I agree with that. I always start with the main character, you know. Who's the lead character? What are they orientated towards? What's their goal and purpose in their world and their story, you know? So I chose to do this story about Professor Moriarty, who's the arch nemesis of Sherlock Holmes. And that turned out to be a pretty good idea because nobody had done a Moriarty comic before. And people kind of understand it going in. But, you know, I had to orientate him a particular way. And it was like, if Sherlock Holmes goes away, what does Professor Moriarty do? So, you know, I started off with the character and then wrote this long monologue for him, like 3 or 4 page monologue where he just kind of grouses about his issues and his problems. That ended up being like the first 5 pages of our first issue of him talking to us in the captions. And it's kind of like everything that results in the story results, you know, for the grace, therefore goes the grace of your lead character. All the other characters come out of him. The entire world builds out of him. So at that point, once you get along and you're starting to write, it's like, oh, I got a really good, colorful cast here. I've got a big, expansive world. And yeah, it's kind of like as you're going, it's kind of like, oh, there's transmedia potential here because I've got Moriarty, but he's also got all these different other original characters that I created alongside him. We've got huge set pieces and great action sequences and stuff. So this would have potential to become a film. This would have potential to become a video game and stuff like that. But I think all of that just comes out of if you're just thinking correctly on building your character and building your story in the first place. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of stuff nowadays that I think originates from a cynical place, though. It's kind of crowding the comics market. You have a lot of one-offs that are very big, action-y, alien-y, strange things where you can almost sense that the idea of putting the book out is trying to attract interest from you know, film and television companies, and those are never much fun to read.
I was going to say, and then you read it and you say, what was the story?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what this was.
Yeah, I think, you know, creating a comic with the mindset of, you know, wanting to make it into a film is fine. It's just you want it to be good.
Right.
It's got to be great as a comic first, or what else? What are you selling? You know?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head because one of the things I was certainly always say in my class is story is king. Without a story, it really doesn't matter what, you know, medium you're trying to work in. If you have no story, no one cares.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, some people have a story, they don't know how to express it exactly, and they end up landing in comics. So it's like
me,
there, you know,
right?
You know. So, but that's great. You wanted to tell us a film, but it ends up being a comic. But that's great, you know, because you got a good story.
It's the story of comics. Yeah, we can't do anything else. Let's do a comic book.
The funny thing is that at that particular pitch conference in Los Angeles, there were 7 production companies who had advertised that day, we are looking for the next American sci-fi franchise. That's what they wanted to get out of 1,500 writers. So I said, that's it. I have it for you guys. I have exactly what you want. I have a franchise on my hands. And all 7 passed on it. And they couldn't see any franchise in my idea. And then the lady from Universal and the guy from Warner Brothers, they saw a comic book in it. So it's a totally, you know, upside down world. But I do have to say that from a marketing perspective, any studio, any production company, when they see a franchise, they see the cash cow, baby. They see the big bucks coming in. So they will look searching for what has a franchise potential. But what has a franchise potential? There's no formula for that. Had it been a formula, everybody would have launched a franchise by now, but there's none. The guys who launched Superman, they tried for 4 years to sell their ideas in 1934. And it wasn't until 1938 that they finally sold the idea to somebody, to DC Comics, actually. So it would be nice if you can think backwards, like, okay, I want to hit the $5 million fan base potential. Therefore, let me go back and write a story for that. But it never happens like that. Because as a writer, you have to write about things that you are obsessive about, neurotic about, you can't sleep at night about. If you write about those things, they will translate as genuine in your writing, and people will fall for the story. And let the big box people figure out whether it's a franchise or not. Otherwise, as you know, all my friends here said, it smells fake. It smells like you are writing something for an action figure in a McDonald's bag one day, and it's just nobody will read it, you know.
Yeah, it's if you're doing great world building, if you're just building a great story, a great character, that stuff can come, but you got to concentrate on building a great character and building a good world. You know, it's like when she wrote the Hunger Games stuff. You know, she built this really great detailed world. Everything was relative to this central character, and that's why you know, the books are such a big deal, and the movies are so, you know, such a big deal, because the core central idea was really good and the character was really good. So yeah.
So let me ask you, so for those who are here, who are interested in getting into the business, what does it take to get a comic book out there, whether it be on the stands or whether it be in digital format? What's the process?
Force of will.
Yeah.
Madness.
It's just like getting anything made, getting a film, getting a television show done, anything. It's extremely difficult and takes a lot of work, a lot of dedication. And you know, my first book that I did, it was I started my own company. It's called Danger Cat, and we did our first book, and I just self-published it. It was called Profit, and from there we went on to Moriarty. But Moriarty, we worked on that for I worked on it for like 4 years. I spent 2 years writing just the first storyline to that, way before anybody was ever interested in it. I pitched it for years, and finally, like the Image was the last place I ended up going to because I didn't think I'd have a chance with them, and they're the ones that ended up publishing it. But I don't know. I guess we could all probably tell some war stories. But it's a lot of dedication and hard work, and there's a lot of there's every story's different. So. Yeah,
the story for mine is just I decided I was going to self-publish because that's what you did in 1990 if you had a black and white comic, and it was just an inquiry to the distributor. They wanted to see just photocopies of the pages for the book. That was it. They agreed to advertise it, and if I wanted to pay to put flyers in their promotional thing that they send out to the comic book companies, then I would just print a flyer that they would insert. The first book I did, I got an order from Diamond because they had forgotten to include my flyers. I think I got an order for 156 books. And your heart breaks because the print run's going to be 1,000 and you're going to lose a bunch of money. And 156 books, which aren't even necessarily going to be in the hands of anyone. They're just going to go to a comic book shop and hope that somebody buys them. It was crushing to have that happen with the first book. And, you know, as things progressed, I kind of got the hang of it. But boy, you really have to be okay with losing some money to self-publish these days. Yeah. I'm a big fan of spending your own money to promote yourself and do the things that you do. But it's very different now, and I think I should have taken the advice I always give to other people, which is if you can find some way to work for someone else in another capacity for a while, until you know what you're doing, it's not a bad way to go.
I think the key, Daniel mentioned it earlier, the key for me, or the key, let me take the key and then I'll tell you my story. The key is the artist. Unfortunately, in comics, unless you can draw your own work, the key is finding an artist with whom you can collaborate and who kind of shares your vision and has the equal dedication, the equal passion. And I don't mean just to getting into comics, but I mean to your specific project, because if you're not careful, they'll dedicate themselves to 15 pages and then find work somewhere else that's going to pay them a little bit more than what you're paying. And so I think the key is that you've got to find an artist that you can gel with. And so for me, I was very fortunate. I met some very talented guys, very talented artists while I was still in college, earning my degree in creative writing. And one of the two, wanted to be a comics artist. And we began to swap. I had already been submitting stories to Marvel and DC and had my stack of rejection letters. And once we got to talking about it, he also had a stack of rejection letters from Marvel and DC. So we just decided at the time, because this was in the 80s and the independent press was very much a booming thing. We just said, well, why don't we just do our own thing? We'll put our own thing together. And we'll try to do it ourselves. Well, we put it together, and we didn't know what to do with it then. So we didn't know. There was no one really there to tell us how to self-publish a book. So we had, about 6 issues, well, about 3 issues finished, and 6 issues kind of in various production phases. And so we just said, well, look, let's just photocopy this stuff up. And we packaged it out like this. And we didn't exactly have a bidding war, but we had a couple of, and I think just because they saw the volume that we had done and knew that we were dedicated to sort of finishing this project, we had a couple of publishers actually call us to talk to us, and that's how that's how I made my first deal was basically with a couple pretty good artists. One of whom is still working in comics today, still draws for Archie Comics. So.
I think one of the things you guys, if you are serious about this, and I'm saying if you are serious, because everybody has a dream, right? How cool it would be to have a graphic novel on the stand somewhere. But from being from having a dream and actually being gung-ho for getting that dream come true, it's quite a long process there. But if you become serious about it, the first thing you need to be able to put up with is put up with rejections, because they will come, baby, flying at you from every corner of the world. I mean, the rule of thumb is that 99% of people will pass on you, and some people just can't take it. I had literally half a dozen friends. I would consider all 6 of them far more talented than I am. All 6 of them don't write anymore these days for a simple reason. They just couldn't take it anymore. You have to grow thick skin, and you have to learn how to smile and say thank you very much for your time and move on to the next desk and do your pitch one more time, because eventually you hit that person that falls off the chair laughing at how funny your idea is. And finally, okay, thank you, God. Finally, there is a human being over there that thinks that I'm funny. And the other 99 don't think you're funny. They think you're outrageous, you're a loser, you have no idea what you're doing, go back and do something else. But finally, you hit that one person that says, that is crazy funny, do it. And that becomes the wind behind your sails. So you have to deal with that rejection. If you have this sensitive skin, soul, heart, brain, whatever you have that's sensitive, do something about it, because you can't survive. And in the entertainment world, not being able to take rejection in your face and move on is going to kill you eventually.
Well, let me tell you, just to add to the deal about rejection, is it's very common to be rejected. I'm experiencing that a lot in television now, going out and pitching and things like that. Don't assume that a rejection is the end of a relationship. Like, don't go out in a giant ball of flame like, I'm going to show you. Because what will happen is you'll find somebody that rejects you where they loved it, and you don't know the backstory, that they loved it, that they talked to somebody about it, that their boss said no, and they have to be the one that tells you no. I have one executive that was a fan of my comic books that got me to write a screenplay based on the book, and I have had meetings all over LA for almost 10 years, and everybody always says no with the book, but it's because this one girl who was a development executive with the Donner's Company wouldn't let go of how she felt about the script and send it around to friends of hers and things like that. So you don't know what's going on behind the rejection. So again, don't be totally disheartened. A lot of times a rejection they'll couch it with, this is great, but this is not great. There's advice that's attached to those sometimes, and a lot of times that's useful. So don't let it crush you. Let it be sort of like your secondary learning experience, from people in the industry. They'll usually, many of them will offer you a why. You'll get a lot of flat out no rejection letters, but sometimes you'll get a conversation out of it that can help you down the line.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I've gotten fans from, like I have producers that are fans of me now from reading scripts that they rejected. Mm-hmm. They're like, send us more. When you got something else, send it to me, Speaking of Warner Brothers, they, and this is something I didn't realize, but I'd written this, it was a crime noir story involving science fiction, and which it was modeled after like a Philip Marlowe story where, the hero's in every scene, and you don't really know who the bad guy is till the end. And they said, well, Warner Brothers, they have a mandate that the villain has to be 50 to 70% of the movie. Think of Dark Knight Rises, Bane's, in it more than Batman. Think of the Harry Potter movies, the villains are such a big deal. And so that's what we do at Warner's. The villains really control the movie, and so, this is all about your hero, and we don't know who the villain is till the end. But we really liked it. So like, okay, well, I get return calls from that guy now. They're fans of me. And B, I know how to write a movie for Warner Brothers now. I sat down and immediately started writing a heist movie after that. So, where everybody's a bad guy. So, yeah.
The other thing I think is that you have to be willing. I always ask, how bad do you want it? And you have to be willing to give up a lot of stuff. And that sometimes includes date night. That it includes Friday night, beer night with your buddies. You just have to be willing to give up a lot of these things that you might normally, the normal college folks, do, because you have to have that drive. You can learn a lot of stuff here. You can learn a lot of stuff, wherever you go, but you can't learn drive and you can't learn passion. You have to come with that. So I always say, how bad do you want it? What are you willing to give up in order to achieve what you want?
And to flash back in time 2 seconds to the comment that you had just made, learning from those interactions and moving forward, one of the things I think that's most important is whatever you choose to follow, whether it's TV, comic books, or anything else, make yourself a real student of that. Because I think that there's a cynical way that people come at things sometimes where they want to get into a particular business because they like the idea of having created something, and they're not that familiar with what's going on around it. Everybody, I mean, you would not, I work in reality television now, you would not believe the number of people that say, I have an idea for a reality show. And it's like, you know, they haven't watched anything that's on TV. 90% of the stuff that they pitch me is stuff that's already been done. Be a student of what what you love. You know, don't be the guy that only wants to talk about Tarantino movies. Be the guy who has seen lots and lots and lots of other stuff before you choose to run down that path. And it's the same with comics, it's the same with film, it's the same with TV. Be a fan of the stuff that you want to get into.
So I have a question about how, what role, if it plays, do conventions attendance, what role does that play in being a student of the medium as well as trying to sell and pitch your work? How does that factor in?
I guess I'll start. But yeah, that was integral for me. I started, the moment we started creating comics, I started attending conventions like crazy, as many as I could. You know, first it immerses you in the culture. You get to know people. You get to, you know, like every convention I go to now, I know a lot of people. So it's kind of like going to a class reunion or something now, going to conventions. So that's really great, getting to know people, getting to know the culture, getting to know how things work, getting to practice pitching, you know. What I did when we first were putting together Prophet, we put together like 10 pages, and I did this with Moriarty too. We put together 10 pages. Like I had the whole story written, but the artist drew the first 10 pages, then did a bunch of concept artwork, and then I put together a nice looking page with the story synopsis, and we printed it up at the local printer and stapled it so it looked like a 22-page comic book, and I would go around giving those to people. I would go to every publisher at every convention, everybody, and say, is there an editor here? And say, do you want to look at this? And I flip it open and flip the pages and start talking them through the story and pitch it to them that way. And they would give me feedback. And I mean, I did that on hundreds of times, you know, I talked to so many people. And you just, that's the school of doing things, you know, is actually doing it. Conventions are very valuable for that. Just everything, pitching, getting properties out there, getting to know people, you know, and so that's how I ended up getting into the business, was through my experience at conventions.
What about you guys?
Yeah, I agree. I think if you want to work in comics, going to conventions is not an option. I think it's not optional. I think you have to plan to go. Even if you can't afford it, I think you have to figure out how to make it happen.
Absolutely.
And I'll tell you a story. So for me as an editor, going to conventions, everybody wanted to talk to me as an editor. Now this is different from me being as a writer, right? But as an editor, everybody wanted to talk to me. And I can tell you that after the convention, if I get samples, and if I have 2 samples in my hands, and let's assume that everything is equal, that they're both equally fantastic submissions, right? But one of them has a name from somebody that I met at a convention, and I remember talking to this guy. He was a really nice guy. And this one is just from some random name that I don't know, never met, have no idea, there's nothing there. Guess which one I'm going to read? I'm going to read the one that I met at the convention because I remember them as a nice person, assuming they were. I remember them as a nice person, and so they're automatically going to go to the top of my list. I'm going to read them first, where I may not read the other guy. And from the other side of the coin, I absolutely hated going to conventions as an editor because everybody wanted to talk to me and everybody wanted to pitch stories to me. One of the worst things that I did, I think, one of the things that I dreaded the most was portfolio reviews, because artists stand in line for hours to show you their portfolio. And you have to sit there and go through them and give them, and of course, I always like to try to be nice if I can, so you have to try to give them feedback and what they can do to improve. And I will say 95 or slightly higher, most of them aren't ready for Marvel and DC Comics. So you have to tell them that, and you have to burst bubbles.
So you've rejected
I did, and I absolutely hated it. That was the thing that I hated to do. And,
Can I pitch you my project over lunch?
Yeah. So the other thing is that don't plan, when you go to conventions, plan to just build your network. And we talk about this a lot at Full Sail. Plan to build your network. Don't go planning to give them a stack of your script. Don't say, here's my 50-page script, will you read it? Because A, they don't want to take it with them. They don't want to take it home with them. They don't want to have to keep up with it. They don't want to have to be bothered to read it. Go with the intentions of building that relationship with them so that 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, you can drop them an email and say, hey, I met you. We talked about, Godzilla movies, and you liked them, and I liked them both, and I wonder if you might read this submission that I'm sending you on email. Editors would be much more receptive to that rather than if you try to give them a big... Now, if you've got to publish, something printed, and you want to say, hey, I just want to give this to you as a gift, no, I don't, I'm not asking for anything in return, I just want to give this to you as a gift, that's a great idea. You give them samples of your work, that's something that they can take, to the hotel room and read that night. But don't try to bombard them at conventions. Just go there with the intentions of meeting them and getting them to remember who you are.
You want to give them, if you're pitching to them at the show, make it real bite-sized. I see guys stand there for 10 minutes kind of stumbling through this convoluted thing. I'm like, dude, it's my turn. I'll be in and out in 30 seconds. Just get me in there, But yeah, keep it to a log line.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that brings up a good point, which is the importance of learning how to pitch your work. Mm-hmm. So what did you do to learn how to pitch effectively? Dan?
Well, I just don't want to be the guy that starts
That's okay.
every time.
Okay.
I don't want to hog. But,
You're doing such a good job of starting every time.
Oh, thank you. So I started off by, I learned how to pitch by writing cover letters, basically. I was sending out letters to a lot of production companies just pitching my scripts. And in writing those, it was like, pare it down, your story, pare it down. I tend to write mysteries that have very big and complicated plots. People call it plots. I don't like that word, but very complicated stories, but, boil it down to, like what I was saying before, the basics of the character. Who is the character and what is the world that happens, as a result of his existence or her existence. And boil it down to 2-3 sentences. And so that's kind of like, I guess, pitching in a nutshell. Get your story down to very quick, and there's this idea of high concept. I live in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, and so you probably hear this. You hear that all the time.
Oh, yeah. If I hear high concept again, I'm going to pass.
Yeah, I know. But I think I don't know what do you think with that term? To me, I think they just mean boil your concept down into a statement.
I think and I think the idea is, every conversation, I think, is done in stages in Hollywood, which is, if you have me for 15 seconds, you may have me for 30 seconds. And if you have me for 30, you may have me for a minute. And I have a lot of pitch meetings that I go into where none of my presentations are over 60 seconds, and that's just how I choose to work. And if they want to have a conversation with me at the end of that 60 seconds, I'll slow it down and I'll answer anything they want to talk about. But high concept, the idea of having something that's deliverable, you may have a completely genius, very convoluted, crazy story that's going to keep people on the edge of their seat. But ultimately, it is it's a story about a thing.
Right.
And I would think, like with Moriarty, when you said, what does Moriarty do when Sherlock's away? Congratulations, you've just conveyed the entire concept of what it is you need to do, and those conversations would come from that. And I think a lot of people don't prepare well to present their work to the point where they're just going to come in and they're just going to tell you the story. I don't necessarily want to hear the whole story right off the bat. I want to know, again, what the idea is, and if that's enough to get me into a conversation, that's great. So rehearse your stuff before you talk to people. Don't just informally assume they're going to listen to you for an infinite period of time.
Yeah.
And see, I didn't learn this until I was an editor. I didn't know really how to, again, I was very fortunate in that I knew some artists, and this is kind of how I pitched initially. I had the artists with me, and they were part of my pitch, which I think made all the difference in the world. And so I didn't really learn how to pitch until I became an editor and saw the really bad ones. And I was like, I don't have time to read 50 pages of this. I mean, as an editor, I knew that, I had a stack of stuff like this, and I only had so much time because my job wasn't to look through the submissions. My job was to edit the titles that I had. And so even though I wanted to do that, I wanted to give these things the attention, it was through reading good pitches and then through reading really bad pitches that I kind of got, oh, you know what? This is really good because he's encapsulated it all in a tiny little single paragraph that I can read in 3 minutes. Where this other guy sent me 50 pages and say, oh, well, you have to read to the end to get the story. I'm like, well, guess what? I'm not reading to the end. I just don't have that kind of time. So for me, that's kind of how I learned to do it, and it was a sad story because I didn't know until I was an editor.
Mm-hmm. You have to turn into a pitching machine. There's just not a doubt in my mind. You have to become a pitching monster. You have to be able to get your story out in 1 minute, preferably under a minute. And the only way to, maybe there are other ways, but I recommend 2 things. First of all, find a group of friends, take them out for a beer or whatever you want to drink, lemonade, depending on your age, and then just pitch it to them. They will tell you, this is not funny, this doesn't work, do it again. So there are times when I'm writing my log line and it looks very cool, but when I'm starting saying it, it reaches nobody. And people will tell you, I'm not getting this, I'm not getting that. So then finally you nail your log line. Then you have to go, and this is just, and I was the most anti-pitching conferences guy in the world. I've changed my mind completely. You have to go to a pitch conference just to experience what it is to have 2 minutes in front of an executive. You go there, you have a minute to pitch, he has a minute to give you feedback, the bell rings, you're off that table. That fast it goes. Mm-hmm. And it lasts for 1 full day, and you get to pitch to 20, 30, 40 executives, depending on how large the conference is. I would not trade that experience on anything else. It is, forget about getting a deal and getting the $1 million deal. It's not going to happen. Let's just face it. You're going to go there, you're going to come back as poor as you went there, minus the money you paid for the flight. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. Spend your money to gain some experience. There is a major one in New York that's coming in a month. There are like 3 major ones in Los Angeles coming this year. They're like right now like mushrooms all over the place. But go for the big ones, pay the big bucks, go for the big guns, and spend 1 day pitching nonstop. It is amazing. The energy in that room between 500 and 1,500 writers pitching 24 hours nonstop, it's a phenomenal experience. I will not trade that on anything in the world. That's how I got into the whole graphic novel thing on top of everything else. But just to be able to see how, from executive to executive, different reactions to your same pitch, the same, 60 words or less that you're going to spit out real fast. To see how some people, they go like this in the first 3 words and I feel like this. And, that everything else in the world is a phenomenal experience. I can't encourage anybody enough. If you're serious about this industry, learn to pitch and pitch nonstop. Even if you're going to offend half the people out there. People say, okay, this guy is a nutcase. Doesn't matter. Just go and pitch nonstop. Just pitch. Pitch.
Don't wait till you graduate. Start now.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Definitely start now.
Well, wait till I get out of the room.
So I've got this idea for this reality.
So a little bird signaled me that our time is done. So thank you all so much for coming out. Thank you all for serving as panelists. Enjoy the rest of Hall of Fame.